All right, now we are going to head into the bread and butter of the podcast. I say that every week, but let's face it, every week I mean it. I am a firm believer that consistency will take you places that motivation alone cannot. So that's one of the main factors behind not only my podcast, but how I try to live my life and embody that philosophy. And also one of the main things that I try to stress on my, not on my podcast, on my YouTube channel for Motivation Mondays. It's one of my favorite things to do because I think a lot of people get a lot out of it, but I too also get a lot out of it. And I think the more people come together in polite discourse to discuss ideas and different opinions and different things that work or don't work so that we can help others and be a part of someone else's survival guide is such a special thing, because social media and, you know, the emergence of the internet can be such an amazing tool at our disposals. And a lot of times people don't really use it that way. They use it as a, you know, a scapegoat to act in all kinds of egotistical, promiscuous, narcissistic ways in which they wouldn't actually be in real life, but they can get away with it online because, hey, it's just online. Why not use things for good? Now, in the previous part, during Did You Know, I talked about being a political science major in college and having an internship that I didn't actually get to do, but I really would have loved to with the EPA. I had this amazing, thought-provoking German professor who was teaching one of my political science classes. And I remember him being German, not because of the fact that he was German, but just because his accent was so thick. I had to sit a lot closer in the amphitheater-style room because I needed to be able to hear him more clearly to understand the material. But he was so thought-provoking. And the reason why I thought of him today and wanted to share this experience with you is because I saw this story floating around on different social media accounts, and I thought to myself, holy moly, I heard that story before. I heard that in a lecture with this professor. And many years later, it's now on social media. And to me, that was absolutely amazing. And I don't know if everybody's really picking up on it. And that's why I wanted to share it with you, because he was the first person that ever laid this out in a way that I was like, wow. It made me question a lot of things. So here we go. The story is very, very simple, but I think there is so much symbolism and philosophy and just life lesson in this one simple story. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to be a children's author. It's stuff like this because it applies to adults, but it's also put in a way that even children can understand. And that is so important. If we want to affect real change for our future, it has to start with kids. That's why you see a lot of people target kids. It's for the same reason. It's for good or for bad. It works both ways. So the story goes like this. If you take 100 black ants and 100 red ants and put them in a jar, nothing really happens, okay? But if you shake the jar, now the black ants and the red ants, they start fighting. The black ants think the red ants are the enemy and that they're attacking. And the red ants think that the black ants are the enemy and they start attacking. Neither one of them realize that neither one of them is the enemy, and the only true enemy is the person that shook the jar. This is a metaphor for our society. We automatically get divided so easily. So easily we allow ourselves to be manipulated and divided, because a house divided against itself cannot stand. Okay, yes, that story is in the Bible, but it was also quoted by Abraham Lincoln, okay, in reference to the Civil War. Okay, the same thing applies today. That's why those that do not know their history are doomed to repeat it, okay? In the situation with the ants don't stop to think about anybody shaking a glass. They probably don't even think about why they're in a glass to begin with, okay? In a glass jar. We as a society are in a glass jar, and we are so easily manipulated that we don't stop to ask who shook the jar. So when we talk on Motivation Mondays and we talk about this amazing thing that we're going to try to do, which is trying to be the best version of ourselves, to be the adult we needed as children, and to break those generational curses, to provide generational wealth and prosperity and health and happiness to be passed down to our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids and our great-grandkids' and so forth and so on and so on and so forth, we have to understand that we are in a jar, and we have to learn to start asking, who shook the jar? Okay? Because what you're doing is not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. Okay? I said that last week, and I will say it again. If generational wealth was easy, everybody would do it, everybody would have it, and everybody would pass it down. But we live in a society that would rather blame everybody else for their problems. It's never your fault. It's never turn the finger inward. No, 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 no. We never stop to ask who shook the jar. We don't stop to reflect. We don't stop to take accountability. And it's stuff like that that ends up getting passed down to our kids and our kids' kids and our kids' kids' kids. Nobody stops to go, is this really who I want to be? Is this really the way things are? Is this really the stuff that my children are witnessing me do because they're not going to do as I say, they're going to do what they see me do? These are questions we need to ask. We need to start asking who shook the jar. Who is the real enemy? The real enemy is the person or entity that shook the jar. You are doing something that not everybody can do because not everybody wants to do it, okay? Not everybody wants to see you break that generational curse. Not everybody wants to see you go after those goals and be your definition of happy, healthy, and successful. Not everyone wants to see you win. And some people that are watching you win, they're not watching to see how you're doing. They're watching to see what you're doing. And if you're going to be the one to break those generational curses, what makes you think that they want you to do that instead of themselves? It is so much easier to tear people like us down than it is for them to build themselves up. And remember how we talked about there was three types of three types of people? The people that are in line for the inconvenient truth, the people that are in line for the reassuring line, and the people that haven't figured out which line they belong in because they're still waiting to see which way the wind blows. Okay? If you're listening to this motivation right now, you're probably the person that's in line for the inconvenient truth, or you're the person that hasn't quite decided if you're not quite ready for the inconvenient truth and the reassuring line might look a little better. Okay? That's no judgment. We've all been there, but at some point you have to make a choice. And I'm going to assume that if you're listening to my podcast or if you're listening to Motivation Mondays, you are going to be a person that gets in line for the inconvenient truth, because you're going to realize when you get in line for the inconvenient truth, you are that much closer to figuring out who shook the darn jar and realize why they shook that jar and why you aren't going to play into that plot, why you aren't even going to put yourself in that jar or put your family in that jar, because you are going to pass down good things. You're not going to pass down habits that lead to poverty or habits that lead to cancer and bad nutrition and bad attitudes and bad personal beliefs and bad limiting beliefs and everything else. No, that's not going to be you. You're going to figure out how to be a success story. You're going to figure out how to be a measuring stick that then your kids can outdo, and then your kids' kids can outdo. Because when you put your ego aside, you realize that you want your kids to do better than you, and you want your grandkids to do better than you. But it all started with you. We need to stop allowing ourselves to be put in a jar, and we need to start asking, if we ended up in the jar, how did we end up in that jar, and who shook that darn jar? And realize that not everybody riding with you is for you, but also that doesn't mean that everyone's your enemy, okay? Start asking who shook the darn jar, and how do you get out? If you are trying to pass down generational wealth, happiness, and success and prosperity to the next branches of your family, that's going to create some enemies, okay? It's going to shake some enemies, but just make sure that you are not the person shaking the jar, okay? Your moves will be misunderstood by those who aren't meant to be on the journey with you, and that is okay. Those are probably the people that are going to end up in that jar. And those are probably the same people that are lining up for the reassuring lie, or they're undecided and they never will decide because they want to take the easy way out, okay? With that being said, when you're asking questions of where do I go from here, am I ready for that inconvenient truth line? Am I ready to find out who shook that jar? You also have to understand the role that you played in it. Okay? We live in a victim society, but we have to realize that not everybody's a victim. You're not a victim unless you convince yourself you're a victim, okay? You have to understand that there's a certain amount of accountability in every action and inaction that you make, okay? No action is an action just as much as an action is, okay? Words can be said and words can be not said. That's why eulogies and all kinds of other things exist, for all the things that you didn't say that you could have said, okay? We have to understand accountability and the role it plays in all of this. If we end up in the jar, ask yourself, how did I get here? How could it have been different for me? What decisions did I make that ultimately got me into this jar in the first place? And why am I allowing myself to be shaken in this jar thinking that some people are my enemy that are not, because they're also in the jar? Healing is about taking responsibility for the role you played in your own suffering. So together, let's take accountability for all our shizit, good and bad. Let's start working towards our goals of happiness, success, and health, whatever that looks like for us. And let's keep aiming to be the adult we needed as children and going out there to get the necessary skills and accolades and acumen that is going to allow us to pass down generational wealth, happiness, success, and all-around prosperity to the next branches of our family so that the world can be a better place. Because breaking generational curses starts with us and starts with asking, who shook the jar? All right, everyone, this has been the latest episode of the Talks with Taeler Hendrix podcast, coming to you live every single Tuesday as part of the brand family on russosbrand.com. Less than a large cup of coffee a month gets you over 20 plus different podcasts, talk shows, reviews, and so much more. You will not find a better deal for that price with this much content, with so many different varying ideas and different individuals from all kinds of walks of life, accolades in and out of wrestling, and so much more. Until next week, everybody. Talk soon. See you, bye.